Get higher, baby. Get higher, baby. Get higher, girl. Hey.
Go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan Knight, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Bo Knight. And today, we are here to look at the audiobook for The Hobbit. And before we get into that, just in case anybody wants to get a hold of us, you guys can shoot us our first email over at kotpl.pod@gmail.com. Get a hold of us on Twitter at Pageless Library. I got some stuff up on YouTube over there, Knights of the Pageless Library, and Facebook at Knights of the Pageless Library. And with that, we'll jump right into this one.
Well, so where did we listen to this one first, Ryan? As I know it's not a spoiler, but it's like, of course, we're listening on Audible. Like,
right?
To me, you're a scrub if you listen to books any other way. And if you're trying to steal them, that like genuinely makes me feel bad. So don't do that.
Right. Yeah, we we try to keep this pretty kosher. We pay for all the books that we listen to, so I mean, we feel like that gives us at least a small bit of right to be critical about them, because at least we paid them. I mean, Tolkien's not around to collect, but
dude, he's gonna come out of his grave.
Yeah, because they're gonna put so much money on him, it's gonna bring him back to life.
Yeah. His tomb is just full of gold coins at this point.
Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be talking about The Hobbit, which is written by J.R.R. Tolkien. The original book itself, it actually has a few different publication dates, and I think you had those pulled up, didn't you, Bo? Wasn't it like 1937?
Yeah, the first time it was published was 21st of September, 1937.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that old.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a bit older. I mean, obviously pre-World War II and stuff, and that's I don't know. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I think that's kind of what makes this book very special in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, we could talk about the author, but if you don't know who he is, I mean, where have you been?
Yeah, you need to open the hatch that gets you under your rock.
Yeah.
Look into the daylight, because obviously everybody knows who Tolkien is, Lord of the Rings. So The Hobbit is actually the prequel, essentially, to the Lord of the Rings series.
Even though it like doesn't really have much to, I mean, it has a little bit to do with the Lord of the Rings, but not really.
Right.
We'll definitely a standalone. Like it stands alone on its own. So if you don't know anything about this universe, you don't need to be worried coming into this book.
No, and I mean, this is getting off on a little bit of a tangent too, but I mean, Tolkien has tons of other writings that are way lesser known than The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And those other writings, I mean, the Lord of the Rings is a huge series, but like the Silmarillion that he wrote is the one that really kind of fills out the universe and kind of leads you up to these points of what's happening in the well-known stories, the Lord of the Ring and the Hobbit and stuff like that.
Who's the narrator of this, by the way?
The narrator, his name is Rob Inglis, and he is amazing in my opinion.
He does real good. So I'm gonna give a little bit of a spoiler because this book has some singing in it, and he actually does a great job.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on that too, because normally if I come across singing in like a book that I'm reading, like if you see it, it's
easy
like
skip. Like just I was gonna say
exactly. You just like if it's through the rest of the page, you just turn the page, you just continue reading. But in audio form, the fact that he does it and he does it well, just I mean that says a lot. I mean that's awesome. So
yeah, he does a really good job.
Yeah, and he is mostly known pretty much for he read also the Lord of the Rings trilogy for recorded books, and he does an amazing job in those as well. I mean, I just think his voice, they couldn't have picked a better voice to voice like these characters in these books, especially.
Yeah, I agree.
He really does kind of set the tone with that. But Yeah. So definitely highly recommended due to the narrator especially. So this book is this is a high fantasy book. I mean, this is all fantasy pretty much. We're talking dwarves, elves, hobbits, dragons. It doesn't get any more high fantasy than this. And so, I mean, if you're not into high fantasy, don't don't even crack the first page because
Oh yeah, if you don't like elves and wizards, it's like
right.
this is
If you
not for
think
you.
if you think that's nerdy stuff, which I definitely do not, but
I mean, I think it's nerdy stuff, but I'm into it.
right, yeah. Well, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Um, but this is like the highest fantasy you're gonna get, and a lot of people have said he kind of sets the bar for fantasy because
Oh,
he
he
kind
does.
of yeah.
I don't
Because
think
this
anybody's even come close since.
no, and
And it seems
that's
like I sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Just like an idea that I have
no.
right now is that he like has really set up the whole fantasy. Like I feel like all the like tropes, he basically did them all first, and I feel
Sure.
like everybody else is just copying him now.
No, and there's been a lot of things that have said that. I mean, basically what people have said is like without Tolkien, you know, Game of Thrones would not exist. Like it's highly unlikely that, and I don't know George R.R. Martin, and I know that he writes great stories, but it's highly unlikely that he would have come up with some of the concepts that he did that made his story so great without these stories existing that Tolkien came up with. And the thing about Tolkien is Tolkien heavily draws on like old mythology and then he spins it with his own tale. So he's not, by no means was he creating 100% original stories, but he was taking stories from so many different places and bringing them all together in this one world. That's what makes his stories so unique,
Well,
basically.
and the thing that kind of blows my mind is like the amount of consistency he has about like, like mentioning these people over here that do this, and then they interact with those people and they like behave the way that he already talked about like a long time ago. And
Yes.
he is in like the amount of detail actually in even just The Hobbit is insane to me.
Right. Right. And the Hobbit, so segue, moving forward a little bit. The Hobbit is relatively the shortest of most of these stories. The Hobbit's only 11 hours long.
It's 11 hours, but to me it seemed like it went quick.
It went quick, and two, tons of information crammed into 11 hours.
Tons of information, tons of action, tons of like even like boring bits, like like mundane stuff, like everything. It seems like there was everything. It's
right.
kind of yeah, I don't know.
I think that's what kind of impresses me about this book too, is that he told so much story in 11 hours that most books would struggle to tell in like a Game of Thrones 40-hour book. Like he did it, and the reason is, I know you said there's some boring parts, and we'll get to it a little after the spoiler wall.
Boring, like there are just like some situations that they're in that are not all that interesting.
No,
but like there are things that led them up to have to deal with that.
Right, and that's what I was gonna say is he justified them so well. Like they needed to be there to progress the story, and he didn't dwell on them. Like we'll talk about it a little bit after the spoiler wall, which we'll cross the spoiler wall here real quick. So I'll get the other stuff out of the way. I'm excited to talk about this one. If nobody could tell, that's why I'm kind of going off on a tangent already. Yes, I will admit to that, and I am not ashamed of that.
You shouldn't be.
So right now, what I'm seeing on Audible is that this book is like $28. Bo said he's seen something else, and there's a couple different renditions of it on Audible. So to be clear, we are listening to the recorded books version. And I think even recorded books has two.
They have a dramatized one too. I mean,
yes.
I probably wouldn't like that, but your mileage
with that. Sure, the dramatized one is only 4 hours long.
Oh, so, really?
Yes. So
did it come out after the movies?
I don't know. Let me look real quick. It came out. I'm not seeing it on here. so I don't want to dwell too much on it. No, it looks like maybe probably before the movies, I'm gonna guess.
It does seem like that. I can't see a freaking
Well,
release date.
it definitely would have come out before the Hobbit movie. That's
Right.
for sure. Maybe not. Maybe after Lord of the Rings, but before the
Yeah,
Hobbit.
that, I didn't even mean Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, definitely before the Hobbit. So maybe that's where they were getting that from. I also see too that recorded books has two oh no, maybe not. Rob Inglis. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at this all wrong. Basically, there's two versions of The Hobbit you can get on Audible, and they're both read by Rob Inglis. So, but the one we listened to was the recorded books one. This other one I'm looking at that is also by Rob Inglis is only $17. So
That's not bad.
no, and I had this one on our wish list, and I snatched this one up for like $4. So it went on like super sale.
I'm gonna give my recommendation. If you like high fantasy, you have to listen to this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you're anyone who is into like we said, dwarves, elves, dragons, any of it, I mean, you have to listen to this for sure. And this is a relatively, I would say for sure, because I've listened to the first two books of the Lord of the Rings as well. This is a great entry point because this one is far easier to follow than those ones are.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think the pacing is about perfect.
sure. I think the pacing in this one is excellent, actually. And like you said, it might kind of dip a little bit, and you might, I found myself daydreaming a little bit, but then it picks it right back up. Like that's what I said. He doesn't dwell on the boring parts, like
Well,
other
and
books I know that kind of go into
Well-
way too much detail about a little trip that their walk through the forest. Like he doesn't dwell on stuff like that.
and I mean the narrator does come out and say like this something happened here, but I'm not gonna dwell on it.
Yeah, and we should mention that how this story is told is this is very much centered around the Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, but this is definitely like a narrator reading a book to you, and it breaks the fourth wall all the time, where the
Yeah.
narrator is talking directly to you as the reader, or if you are reading it, it's like you're reading someone's journal. So,
Right.
like Bo said, there's a lot of they were there for 3 days, but we're not going to talk about what happened in those 3 days. Like he just skips it altogether. And I thought that was actually very interesting.
And I mean, we'll talk about it more later, but I think it does some really like this is to me like breaking the fourth wall like in the best way.
Sure.
Instead of being like nudge nudge, I know I'm a book. Haha, isn't that funny? I know I am thing.
Right.
It like he like gives you more depth to the story. Just like the little bit of information that he does tell you is kind of interesting sometimes.
Right.
But so yeah, I mean, did you recommend this bad boy? Yeah, I think he did. So should we just go straight into spoilers?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, we're going to talk about spoilers right now. If you have not listened to or read the book, please go do that and then come back. And
No, if you've seen the movies too, and you're like, oh, I know The Hobbit, I could skip it. You don't.
Please,
don't even think you do.
Please still go get this book. By all means, please get this book. Do yourself a favor and get the book.
J.R.R Tolkien's tomb is not completely filled with gold coins yet, so you need to go buy it.
And
let's go right into the spoilers.
Let's pass the spoiler wall and we'll start talking about the story. So where does the story open up? This one opens up
with Bilbo. He's just like chilling, smoking his pipe, right?
And this one opens up in a hole in the ground, man.
Right, and I love the way that it kind of like describes the hobbits and like how they live, but they're not like dirty; they're clean people, but they just like to hide away.
Yeah, they live in a hole in the ground, but it's not a dirty hole. Yeah, it's a clean underground dwelling with a nice round door.
And I love how he kind of like when you kind of interact with a different race of what are they called, like, oh my god, like the hobbits, like what are they?
They're halflings, so I guess they are. That is their race. I mean,
is it race?
They're like a subspecies kind of humans, because they're like really small humans kind of. But they're I
Yeah.
mean they're hobbits. That's what they are. They're halflings.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of the way to describe like, because like the dwarves, like I love when you interact with the dwarves, and he kind of gives you like a brief history of the dwarves and like how they would act.
Sure.
And I like when he does that. Like whenever you encounter a new race or whatever.
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, he does a great job of that. And so yeah, like right when we open up with these hobbits, he gives us a real quick, very precise backstory on a hobbit. So you know what a hobbit is. And I very much appreciated that, because obviously coming into this, I knew what a hobbit was and whatever. But I do love that he gives you that real quick, precise background story, just in case you didn't know what a hobbit is. He'll tell you in like, I don't know, probably 10 minutes or less. Like,
Yeah. So the book opens up with Bilbo. He's just smoking his pipe, and he's like thinking about having breakfast or something, because that's like all hobbits love to do is eat. It seems like, and Gandalf like rolls up on him, and he's like, "I'm looking for somebody to have an adventure," and he's like, not me," and he's like, "You know what? Maybe it will be you."
yeah, and Bilbo is absolutely like, no, I don't want to go on any adventures. He said nobody goes on adventures around here. Hobbits aren't big on adventures. And Gandalf, the wizard, he's like, no, come on, your ancestors used to go on adventures all the time. And Bilbo's like, well, we don't do that anymore. Have a good day. Like, basically just dismisses this ultra powerful, known around the world wizard immediately. He wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but then so Bilbo goes back inside. Then Gandalf, he like goes up and writes like a secret rune on the door and leaves.
Yeah, and Gandalf leaves, right? And so later that night,
No, wait, we forgot, because Bilbo invited him over for tea, and he was like, "Why did I do that? I don't even want that guy at my house."
Oh yeah. You're right. And so later that night, uh, Bilbo gets a knock on his door, and he goes to the door, and there's a dwarf standing there. And Bilbo's like, can I help you? He's like, I'm here for the meeting. He's like, what are you talking about?
And he just lets himself into his house.
Yeah, the dwarf just lets himself in. And we're not even going to try to do names for the dwarves, because there's a lot of them, and their names are all very rhymey and similar, and we will just butcher it. So I don't even want to try.
Yeah, I'm not going to remember. It's too hard to keep them straight.
We'll give you the leader here in just a minute, because that one's easy to remember.
So yeah, basically over the whole evening, like a bunch more dwarves show up, and every time he hears a knock at the door, he's expecting Gandalf, but he just keeps being more dwarves, and he like finds himself like actually being a really good host to them, and he doesn't even know why. He's like, I don't really know why I'm giving these people my food, but oh well.
Yeah, and by lots of dwarves, by the end of the night, he's up to about, what is it, like 8, I think, at one point, and then he gets another knock, and like 5 more fall in.
Yeah.
With Gandalf. Gandalf's there too. So by the end of the night, he ends up with like 13 dwarves and Gandalf and himself. So you got like 15 people there in his little tiny hobbit house.
Yeah, and so they all like have dinner together, and then they clean up everything, and they like actually help Bilbo clean up, and they like sing a little song that's kind of funny to me, where they're like talking about like destroying his house like as they're cleaning up.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yeah. It was, and like the songs I think could be a little off-putting a little bit, but they actually do kind of add more lore and stuff to the story, which is kind of interesting.
Right, and I think that's sort of what, I mean, I can't obviously speak for Tolkien, but I think that's kind of what he was liking to do with the songs, is basically, because yeah, like we said, you skip over a song when you see it in a book, because I'm not gonna like try to read it in some sing-song voice, but in audio form with someone reading it, it actually came across very well, and mostly because Rob Inglis actually had the perfect voice for this. But it's exactly like you're saying, the songs are dipping more into the lore of who is singing them, basically, than anything, right. I think.
Well, and they kind of give you a little bit of like like a kind of like a snapshot of history to them
Sure.
almost.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And
Because we'll get more songs throughout the book, and I
oh
think
yeah,
that's
there are a
exactly
ton.
right.
There are a
Yeah.
ton.
Mm-hmm.
I would say almost even like maybe 20% of the book is songs.
Yeah, it's a pretty big chunk. Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, so anyway, the dwarves are all there and they're meeting there because they want to go take back their home, which I can't even remember what it's called.
Well, it's oh man, it's in the Lonely Mountain. I can't remember the name now of the mine either, or the town. Man, I'm terrible. A terrible
So
reviewer.
basically they had to leave their home before because there was so much gold and stuff amassed from the dwarves mining that it attracted a dragon, and the dragon had like chased them all out of their home. And Thorin, who's the leader of all the dwarves, he is the rightful king to this place and he wants to take it back. And so they're like
Right.
going on a quest to take it back. And the reason they want Bilbo is because supposedly he is like a great burglar.
Yeah, that's what Gandalf convinced them of, is that he is a burglar, and the sign that Gandalf put on his door before he left it said like burglar, I think.
Yeah,
So
I think it's a like burglar house.
right. So yeah, so that's how the dwarves all knew to go meet there, is because because they had the burglar sign on his door. That's hilarious to me.
Well, and Bilbo wasn't even gonna go, and because all the dwarves are like, "What? This guy looks like he's not gonna be able to do anything." And then he like kind of like stands up for himself. He's like, "What? I would be more than capable of doing this for you guys." And he ends up like agreeing to it just because like his pride was hurt.
Yeah, and I thought that was hilarious because at first he was like, "Absolutely not. I don't want to go on an adventure."
Yeah.
And then when they were like, "Well, he can't even. There's no way he'd be good anyways." He's like, "Yeah, I can. I could do
Yeah.
it." Like, I thought that was awesome.
The next day he like wakes up and he's like, "Oh, all the dwarves. That must have been like a dream because his house is still on a nice shape." And he's like just eating breakfast, and Gandalf comes in. He's like, "You know, you only have like 10 minutes to meet them, right?"
Right. Yeah. I know. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And so then he like meets up with them, right? Well, he goes and Gandalf meets up with them too, and they like start their journey off to go to this mountain. And even in the beginning, it seems like they don't really know what they're gonna do once they get there.
Oh no, they don't really have a clue actually when they're on their way.
No, they don't at all.
It was actually kind of funny because they almost were just like, yeah, they were all like 13 buddies, and they're like, yeah, we can do this. Let's go take our mountain back from a dragon.
Yeah.
We should mention too that like when their home was taken and to now, it's been a long time. It's been like
It's been
100 years.
I get the sense it's like been one dwarf generation, right?
Yeah, because Thorin's father is no longer alive, I think.
Yeah.
So obviously that's why he is now the rightful heir. Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror.
Yeah.
I
Oakenshield.
love that. Which that's an important point that is not even in the book. So
It's not.
Going back to why, like you said, even if you've seen the movie, do yourself a favor and get the book, because that's kind of just it. The movie, I liked the Hobbit movies because they were entertaining, but without saying, well, the book is better. The thing is the book is just different. And I think it's because they took a lot of liberties when they made the movies. It didn't need to be 3 movies, first of all. That's way
No,
too much.
it
That was way
didn't.
too much. And so because it was 3 movies, they kind of added a lot of shit in that was not in the books.
Well,
So
it's like each movie ends on like just a normal conflict in the book.
right.
And and they add stuff, and they put characters who aren't even there in the movies that can have nothing to do with anything, and they they
Right.
like make it seem like there's this huge forbidding evil force which has nothing to do with what's going on in the book at all.
No, it doesn't. And that's kind of why the book is just a lot more subtle. The movies
it
were
really is.
the movies were so dramatic compared to how this book is. It kind of blew my mind when I listened to the book. I was like, whoa, this is way more like mellow.
Yeah,
But
and it is, and there's a lot of subtlety too, like in the things that they say when they're talking to each other.
oh,
A lot.
sure. Yeah. So our company is now traveling, and what is the first little thing they run across? Is it the it must be the trolls. Yeah, the trolls. So while
Yeah.
they're out, they end up basically getting into a conflict with some trolls. These are mountain trolls.
And they capture
And
everybody, I think, but Bilbo, right?
yeah, the trolls capture all of the dwarves, and they don't capture Bilbo. And Bilbo's like trying to kind of help talk their way out of it, basically. I love the way he does the trolls, and I love the way they're written too, because they're pretty dumb.
Oh yeah, they're
But-
super dumb.
Yeah, but he does a great job of making them dumb like that. And I will give them credit in the movie. They get this line correct when they ask Bilbo who he is, and he's like, "I'm a hobbit," or he's like, "I'm a burglar hobbit," and they're like, "What's a burglar hobbit?"
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was awesome.
Well, and I like too the way that they like end up tricking them is because the trolls stay out past sunlight, they turn to stone, and Gandalf like shows up and he pretends to be one of the trolls, so to make them
Yeah,
keep arguing
yeah.
about what to do with the people,
Right.
and they
Yeah.
just keep
See-
arguing all night, and then they get
and-
caught by the sun.
I can't believe they didn't do that in the movie,
movie,
because that's
yeah.
a way better way to do it. Yeah,
Yeah,
Gandalf,
he's
like,
just like coming
like-
up and smashing this rock.
I love how he like throws his voice and he basically is like, no you, and they're like, what? No you. And he's like, I didn't say anything. He's like, no, that was definitely you who said it. Yeah, it was awesome.
That I like that part. I mean, the dwarves are like helpless. They get in
They-
so many jams.
Yeah, they kind of are actually, and Bilbo kind of realizes he has a very unique talent kind of from the beginning. And what's funny is the unique talent of the Hobbit is he can almost be undetectable without even meaning to. And it's
Yeah.
kind of
Well, people
because
aren't used to like running into hobbits.
yeah. And so so dwarves are smaller than humans, and he is even smaller than them. So he's pretty small.
He's pretty small.
And what's interesting though is like he's also very underestimated, and like
Oh,
basically nobody sees him or a hobbit in general as like a threat. Yeah. So he can almost go undetected without even really meaning to, and that's kind of how he gets away from the trolls, and that's kind of how like several of these other parts play out in which the dwarves kind of stumble into something, and Bilbo finds himself the only one not in trouble.
Right. A couple different times.
Sure.
And I mean, I think we should just hit on like the high points. Like, so next I would go to like where they're in the cave, you know?
Yeah, because they end up going into, they go like through the mountains.
Right. And
Well,
then
they
it
end up
starts
going in the cave.
storming really
They-
bad.
So they go in the cave though first. There's a troll's cave, and
Right.
that's
And
where
they
they
like
find
get
some
weapons
weapons.
and stuff.
Yeah, so they
And-
find a
and
few
gold that they
key
bury.
weapons. Right. And they find a few key weapons. So Bilbo finds himself a little what ends up, it's a knife to a normal person, but it's basically a short sword for him because he's so small. And Thorin ends up taking a weapon, the Goblin Cleaver, and Gandalf
Is it
takes.
Biter?
It is. Oh man, yeah, I think so. Or is
We'll
that?
get to that in a minute.
Is that Gandalf's weapon? No, Gandalf takes what? Narsil?
Yeah, because they don't actually talk about the goblins don't talk about what Gandalf has.
No, because it's not as big a deal to the goblins. That's why Thorin's is known as the Goblin Cleaver, because it's
Oh,
killed all.
Cleaver. That's right.
Yeah, the Goblin Cleaver. Yeah,
Well, just because one of them's Biter and one of them's Cleaver, I think.
yeah.
Anyway,
So they find those weapons. they hit the road again. They get up in the mountains, and there ends up being like a terrible storm, right?
Right. And so they
Is
go
the
into this
part where
cave.
they're assaulted by the hill giants too. Is that this part?
Oh, yeah, but I mean that part is like, to me that wasn't like, I didn't take that as like the hill giants were attacking them. I just took that as like the hill giants were just throwing rocks.
That's kind of exactly what it is, and that's like they almost end up getting hit by like rock slides, and it's
Yeah.
because there's giants fighting. Well,
Yeah.
it's not nearly as dramatic as in the movies. Don't
No.
worry about that.
They're just like in
It's
the
pretty
background, like throwing rocks at each other.
Right. And so, the dwarves get close to getting hit. So they go into a cave and they decide that's where they're going to, rest for a while. And the cave ends up opening up and they end up falling into the goblin's lair because it's a trap cave, basically.
Oh, I didn't think they fell. I thought like the back of the cave just opened up all of a sudden.
Is that what it is? But I
To
thought
me, that's how I took it. But I mean, I could see how you would think it was like falling, but because they come in and they just grab them all, except for Gandalf.
Is that what it is? Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I must have been crossing it with the movie because in the movie they all fall.
Yeah, they fall in. But so like to me, what happens is like a crack opens up behind them, and the goblins just storm in.
I think you're right. Actually, now that I think about it, so they don't get Gandalf. They do get Bilbo, but for a pretty short time, because Bilbo ends up falling. Right, he falls down.
Not yet. So like what they take them all and they bring them all to the Goblin King, and the Goblin King's freaking pissed off at them. He's like, "Why would you guys be in my kingdom, freaking? And you have these weapons that are like specifically made to kill goblins." He's gonna execute them all, and then Gandalf just like shows up out of nowhere and frees them all. That's when they're running away, and Bilbo's on the back of somebody, and when
that's
they're running
right.
away, when they're running away, somebody pushes the guy that he's on the back of, and Bilbo just falls off this catwalk like into the black, inky blackness below them.
Yeah, he falls really deep into the cave, basically.
Where he's like, it's so dark he can't even see anything. And this part is actually like legitimately, to me, kind of terrifying.
It kind of was. And in the book, it's way not to keep going back to the movie, but again, way less drama. And the reason is because in the book, our camera essentially is following Bilbo. There are very rare parts in the book compared to the movie where the camera leaves Bilbo to go be like, and by the way, all this other shit is happening.
Well, what it does is like it'll follow Bilbo, and then Bilbo will talk to the other people and learn about what happened when he was away.
Yeah, but it's usually a pretty quick summary.
Yeah.
Like, we fought all the goblins, and sorry, man, I dropped you. That's it. That's all it is. Like, there is no like, dude, and then we ran and we cut this catwalk, and it, like the movie played it out so much.
Yeah.
So
Bilbo's down here, right? I don't really he like finds Gollum, like in this lake, right? That like basically takes up the whole area. Like he can't go anywhere except for the lake.
First thing he does though is he finds a ring.
Right.
That's the very first thing that happens is Bilbo finds a ring. Hint, hint, Lord of the Rings. So he puts this ring in his pocket, and then he finds that there's another creature down there with him, and this is Gollum.
But it's so ominous because Gollum's like in a boat talking to him at first, like way away from him.
And Bilbo can see Gollum's eyes, right? Because his eyes are so big that they like are catching any little source of light. So he can see Gollum's eyes. That's pretty much it, though. Like they describe Gollum, he's like a real slender, kind of humanoid-looking, creepy. Basically, the Lord of the Rings movie did it perfect. Like they nailed
it. Exactly what I imagined him looking like.
Yeah. So Peter Jackson for the Lord of the Rings series, he nailed Gollum. So if anybody's wondering what Gollum looks like, just think of that because he nailed it. So they have this little bit of
with huge eyes.
Correct. A meth head who's been living in a cave. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's like all gray.
So they have a little bit of an exchange because basically Gollum's like, "Oh, I'm gonna eat you," and Bilbo's like, "Whoa, no, don't eat me, let me go." And
Yeah, but
they're
I mean,
like,
it's
fine.
kind of like the way that they talk about it. I think is really like elegant because like they, they kind of like spit some questions back and forth, and then Gollum like kind of reveals he's like, yeah, I want to kill you and eat you.
Yeah, yeah, because Gollum's like, oh, I want to play a game. Basically, let's tell riddles to each other, and then whoever
Which
can't
is,
solve a riddle
but like
loses.
the riddle game is like a kind of well established thing in this world, and there are like there's like etiquette
There's
to the
etiquette.
rules that you would like
There's
to the
yeah,
riddles you would tell and stuff like that.
yeah. It's very interesting. I think it's actually really cool.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the my favorite parts.
And so they kind of go back and forth, telling some really cool riddles, by the
Yeah.
way. And basically, um, Bilbo has to like trump Gollum because Gollum's getting frustrated. So and Bilbo's kind of getting more and more scared because he's stuck, like you said, in the pitch black with this creature that basically reveals like if you lose, I'm gonna eat you. That's what I'm gonna do.
And I love how like as the game is going on, Gollum is getting closer and closer to Bilbo the whole time.
Right. And Bilbo can't, like I said, Bilbo can only see his eyes. That's it.
Yeah.
So by the end of it, Bilbo basically kind of cheats and he says, what do I have in my pocket? Well, Gollum can't guess that. And then Gollum freaks out because he loses and he's basically like, says that Bilbo cheated. And he says, I'll be back. And Gollum leaves because Gollum's going to go get his ring. Well, now he can't find his ring. And so he really starts to freak out because he thinks now Bilbo has his ring. And then Bilbo puts the ring on, right? At that
Yeah.
point. And then all of a sudden Bilbo can see in the dark, like perfectly see in the dark now, once he puts the ring on. And that's what
And
allows
so
him to.
Gollum thinks that Bilbo knows the way out and left. And so Gollum like accidentally leads Bilbo to the exit.
Right, because Bilbo doesn't realize right away that once he put that ring on,
Yeah,
he's also invisible. Right. So that's exactly what happens is that Gollum's like, oh, he knows how to leave, so he starts running towards and Gollum always talks to himself.
Yeah.
So he doesn't do any thinking in his head. He's talking to himself because he essentially has a split personality. And this is where we get the precious and that kind of stuff with the one ring because
See, and this is something I didn't understand about the movies, but I think the book makes it a little bit more clear. So the ring makes anybody who wears it invisible.
Yes.
See, like in the movie, they didn't really I didn't really understand like what happened when Sauron put on the ring.
Well, Sauron would be like the one exception because like in the Lord of the Rings movies, you see him wearing it just out,
Yeah, and that's what I didn't understand because
Right.
I didn't understand if it made him invisible or what.
I think the whole point is because no one else can essentially harness the power of the ring besides Sauron. So like anyone else, any mortal or anything who puts it on, they just turn invisible. That's all that happens.
So what happens when Sauron puts it on?
Dude, you seen it? He just starts smashing people with his mace.
He just starts beating ass. So he just gets like more powerful overall.
Yeah, and he already is like huge. He like is like twice as big as a normal human or anything. And
So is he human?
No, he's not. And I'd have to go back in. This is where like the Silmarillion kind of fills this stuff in.
Okay.
And so Sauron is a similar being to like what Gandalf is.
Oh, so he's kind of like a wizard?
Not even a wizard. So without getting too far off topic, the Silmarillion and a couple of the other books really fill in the hierarchy of how this world works, starting with literal gods down to like it goes gods, it goes the beings that created these gods, and then the beings that follow. Or not the beings that created the gods, the beings the gods created.
Okay. I was going to say
there's the wiki for this stuff is huge because of that. And Sauron is basically one of these beings that was created similar to Gandalf. Gandalf is one of the only 5 wizards that were created. And you could kind of think of them as like angels and demons is what this world suffers.
I never even thought about it like that.
Same with the Balrog. The Balrog is something that was created. And there's not just one Balrog. This is the 3rd age we're in. You have to remember that. This and this and the Lord of the Rings takes place in the Third Age. So things like Gandalf, the Balrogs, Sauron, and stuff, I believe were created in the First or Second Age, because there was the Balrogs were literal like generals in armies at one point. Same with the dragons. There were more than one dragon before in this universe, and they used to fight with each other like they as armies and stuff. So this world, that's people think that that George R.R. Martin created a huge world with the Game of Thrones, which he did. I'm not taking that away from him. The thing about Tolkien, people underestimate how much Tolkien created because people only know The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And you get a lot in those, but he literally was like, oh, well, now I have elves. Well, now I got to figure out where elves came from. And he went back and he tells all that in other books. He tells you where everything comes from and why it exists.
That's crazy to me, and I'm really interested in all that now, actually.
Yeah, I am too. I really want to get the Silmarillion and listen to the Silmarillion, because I think out of all the books, that's the one that most establishes like what's happening, because it takes place during like the First and Second Age instead of the Third Age.
And one thing I appreciate about this book is like they get in these sticky situations, like right here where they lose their horses and stuff. They don't like that doesn't immediately get remedied for them. Like they have to actually struggle when they have no food, no horses, no weapons. Like
sure,
it's I like that.
Yeah, I thought that was cool too. He doesn't skip out on those little details like that.
Right. So Bilbo goes invisible and he like sneaks back up on the dwarves and he like just pops up back in their camp and he's like what's up, guys?
And so the dwarves now are on the other side of the mountain, we should mention. So it does further their progress into where they're trying to go. This little chase scene they went through actually helps, because then they can cut straight through the mountain and they end up on the other side. And when they get to the other side, now the goblins don't follow them out. But now there's a bunch of wolves outside,
right?
Like huge, rabid, mean wolves that are like, oh, we want to kill you guys too, basically.
Well, because Gandalf can talk to them.
Yeah, Gandalf can talk to the wolves. See, and there's so much more established in the book than the movie, and that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. It's just for anyone curious about like why the wolves in the movie look different. Peter Jackson gets this correct, because these are wargs, but they're not the same wargs as like the bred wargs in
that they like
the later books. Yeah, these are like feral wargs essentially.
Right. And they have like intelligence and they can talk.
Yes, they can talk, they can communicate, and there's like hundreds of them when we get to this part. It's not like in the movie where, since Azog is not a real thing in this, he's not there. It's just wolves.
Right.
Essentially, it plays out is the wolves are like, yeah, we're gonna kill you guys. We're wolves.
They get them up in a tree.
And the dwarves all run up in the trees, and Gandalf starts doing some magic, and they nailed that in the movie. He lights pine cones on fire, and he starts throwing them down, and he starts lighting wolves on fire down on the ground.
Right.
And the fire catches, and someone way off in the distance can see it, and that happens to be the Great Eagles.
Right. And this makes so much more sense in the book, like why they don't just take them all the way, because they won't.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad you caught onto that too.
Well, because I remember watching the movie and I was like, why don't the Eagles just take them to the end? This is dumb. 0 out of 5.
Everybody says that too. Everybody says that. Like, why don't the Eagles just freaking take them all the way?
Well, because they don't even explain it, that the Eagles can talk and like they actually communicate with them.
And the Eagles, they're not just giant eagles. They are a race of beings in this world. They are their own thing in this world.
Yeah.
And so essentially what happens is the giant eagles come in, they swoop down, they scatter all the wolves, and then they grab Gandalf and the dwarves and Bilbo, and they take them back to their home. They don't just take them and drop them off, because in this, Gandalf didn't really just ask for their help. They just came and helped.
Yeah, and they like owed Gandalf, right?
Yes, exactly.
And they don't explain what Gandalf did for them. It's just like, yeah, they owed me a favor.
That's the really cool thing about Tolkien's books is just like that. He's not going to explain that part, but there's way more surrounding this interaction with Gandalf and these eagles than can be told in probably a single book. Like
Right.
so the Eagles take
the
them
Eagles
back to
wouldn't take them all the way though, because like it's dangerous to fly that far, and they have like enemies that will try to hurt them, and they're like, we're not gonna put ourselves in danger for you guys. Sorry.
No, and they basically say we're gonna. Sorry for anyone who can hear that. My 3-year-old's yelling at my door. Um, the Eagles basically say too, like, we have like a certain distance we'll fly from our home, and that's it. So
Yeah.
sorry, we're not gonna leave that area.
Well, and
just
I
for
think
you.
they even say like, we owed you Gandalf, but we didn't owe you that much.
Exactly. Yeah, there is no like. Plus, they essentially too say like, we brought you back here, and they put them in prison. By the way, when they
Yeah, they
first get
do.
them back, it's not like all the movies where they just bring them back and they drop them perfectly and it all worked out just fine. They put them in prison in the Eagles' homes first,
Isn't
and
it
then
called
they're
the
like,
Eyrie?
okay, the Eyrie, yes,
Eyrie.
yep,
Yeah, it's just because in Dota lore, that's where like Skyrath is from. He's from the Eyrie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. See, and again, things like Dota might not even exist if it weren't for these books. Like, let's be
Yeah.
real. I mean, that's where a lot of lore from a lot of things comes from, is from these. Tolkien laid the groundwork for so many things to build on.
And it's crazy to me that he did it so long ago.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're not talking like George R.R. Martin, who's doing it right now. I mean, this dude was far ahead of his time with this kind of writing. And it's probably why he didn't really get popular until after he died, because he almost wrote this stuff at like the wrong time, because things like this weren't nearly as acceptable as they are now.
Yeah. So yeah, the Eagles they end up letting them go, and then is this when they meet the shape-shifting guy?
Yep, they leave and they meet Bjorn.
Bjorn, that's his name. He's cool as
Yep.
hell.
He is cool. He is like Bo said, he's a shapeshifter. And if he is he can be a human. And when he's a human, or a man, I should say, not really a human, but he looks like just a human man. And except he's huge. I get the sense that he's like 12 feet tall, like gigantic.
And I love that he's like, he's like this forest dweller and he doesn't really like people. So Gandalf makes it seem like it's just him at first, and then like slowly everybody else keeps coming in as he's telling the story.
To go to Bjorn's home. Yeah. Because he's like, we can't all go at once. He doesn't really like company.
One thing I do love that Tolkien does, like the people who are like telling the tales telling stories to other people, like are actually good storytellers themselves, and like there are certain people who they talk about stuff and like people don't believe them, or like they talk about like, and everybody knows like Gandalf's telling the truth about what they're doing, and
Right.
so like, and he's like trying to entice him a little bit with the story itself, which is it's interesting to me, like because that's so realistic.
Sure. And it ends up being like, because Gandalf said, there's only a few of us, and there's like 15 of them. Bjorn ends up, at first he was very reluctant, but then as Gandalf's telling this story and slowly like two dwarves at a time are showing up, basically Bjorn's like, yeah, keep coming in. Okay, go on with the story.
He just wants to hear the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I thought that was
because
awesome.
like Gandalf had planned it out on purpose. Like he was thinking ahead, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it did it in Tolkien did it in a great way. I thought that was awesome. And so then they leave Bjorn, and they need to go now through the forest of Mirkwood, right?
Right, and Gandalf leaves them.
Yeah, Gandalf's like, I got something else to do. I'll see you guys later.
But he tells them like, do not leave the forest path.
Right. He says you have to go straight through the forest. Bjorn tells them, do not drink the water. Don't interact with the water. You guys have to stay, go straight through. Don't do anything else. And they immediately get in there and they immediately fuck that up. Because
Well, they didn't mean to. Like, so they
no,
the really first mistake, they come to a river and they can't cross it, and
because
there's
it's
like a
on the
boat on
path.
the other side,
Yeah.
and so they like hook the boat and they like pull it over. But then as they're trying to get everybody across, one of the dwarves ends up falling in the water and just instantly is asleep for days.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was kind of funny. Of course, it was the super fat one.
Yeah,
That Bomber.
yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah. I did think that was a very subtle drop too at that point, where we found out that Bilbo has way better eyesight than the dwarves.
Yeah, like
Because
way,
Bilbo's
way better.
Yeah, because Bilbo is the only one who can see all the way across the river and can. So they're in fog, but Bilbo can see all the way across and see the boat on the far shore. So that's he kind of saved their ass because they couldn't have done
it
that.
gets worse. He
without
saves
them.
their ass so much better. So basically they're like starving in the freaking in the forest, and then they kind of like get all delusional and they're like start all having weird dreams, right? And they kind of all like
And
split
this,
up.
well, because this forest is like it messes with you,
Haunted?
basically. It essentially is, yeah. And what keeps happening to them is they'll see like lights and they'll see fires and they walk up and they're like, "Oh, there's people. Let's go ask them for food." And as soon as they walk into the clearing with them, the lights go out. So like somebody kicks the fire out that they saw, all the torches go out, and also the lights go out. Like they can't see anything at that point. It ends up
Right.
being super dark. So they're like, it's almost as if it were by magic.
Right. And so they like end up getting split up, and what ends up happening is like these spiders freaking have taken them all, and they've like cocooned them all, except for Bilbo is able to like get himself out, right, and like free himself with a sword.
So Bilbo wakes up as one is trying to wrap him up. Like he can feel that his feet are stuck, but that's when he wakes up and that thing's like it's it's going to eat him before it wraps him up. It's not supposed to. So he ends up getting out and he uses this is where we keep getting the name Sting from
Right.
is he gets his little knife out and he freaking kills the spider and then he finds the rest of the dwarves are all cocooned. And I love this part where he puts the ring on and he starts messing with the spiders.
Yeah, when he's
Like,
calling them
he
Atticop,
Yeah.
and they like hate that word.
Yeah, he's insulting these spiders. And because, again, so he puts the ring on, and after he puts the ring on, he can hear what the spiders are saying in his language. He can now understand what these spiders are saying. And I thought that was awesome. And then he starts like, while he's invisible, he starts like throwing rocks at them and knocking them off the trees and killing them all.
Well, and I
these
like too
spiders
that they
are
weren't like
gigantic, by the way.
yeah, but they weren't like adapted to fight with swords. Like they didn't really know how to deal with him having a weapon.
Right. And that's why they kept calling it Sting. They were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, he has a sting of his own," which was really cool.
Yeah. So
So
Bilbo saves them all again.
He really does, because what he does is he gets rid of enough spiders. Oh, and then he ends up going invisible, right? And he distracts them that are left. There's a few of them left, and he ends up distracting them long enough that he can cut one dwarf free, and then they haul them all up onto the tree branch and cut them all free on this branch. Because these trees also are massive in this forest. Also, the movie got this part terrible. I thought they did a terrible job on this part in the movie. Simply because, like, in the movie, he just, like, runs up and he cuts them free, and they, like, fall perfectly smooth to the forest floor through spider webs that had already tangled them up. Like, what?
Yeah, I don't know.
Whereas he also, too, he's cutting like, when he hits the spiders with the rocks, they fall, and they fall to their death when they hit the ground.
Yeah, because I mean, like a spider's not really like it's not made out of armor. It's just a spider.
But that's an interesting change they made for the movie, where like clearly they are in a dangerous situation because of how high up they are too. So Bilbo saves their ass. They all get out. They somehow, I don't even remember how they get to the ground again. But then the elves show up, right?
Yeah, so then the elves show up and they like take them prisoner.
Yep. Take all dwarves prisoner. And the elf king of the forest is also like, why did you keep trying to attack my fellows in their whatever, in their little circles? Because clearly the elves are magical and they were like causing the dwarves to, have problems when they would try to approach them. And they were like, nah, we were just looking for food. We're
Yeah,
starving.
they were trying to find help, and they don't
Yeah.
believe them because Thorin doesn't really want to tell them what they are doing because he doesn't want to give them a share of the treasure.
Right. He's being very cryptic because he knows if he asks for their help through the forest, they're going to want something from him.
Right.
And Thorin is pretty greedy, we will find.
Yeah, he's super greedy. But Bilbo didn't get captured by the elves.
Nope. Because
He's
Bilbo
invisible.
goes invisible with his ring.
Right, and up to this point, he hadn't let the dwarves know that he could go invisible. But he's invisible for like quite a few days, and he like kind of devises his plan to get them out of there.
Yeah, and what he essentially ends up doing, the very short of it, is he goes invisible. He goes to where the wine barrels are kept from the elves, and he ends up basically he finds out that all the empty wine barrels get knocked into the river, and then they float downriver and they get picked up again to get refilled. So he's like, oh, I'll let all the dwarves out, we'll all get in wine barrels, and then when they let the wine barrels go, we'll escape. It's actually a really good plan. Like
See, and I love that, like, so there actually is a flaw in his plan, and the narrator points it out, and I hadn't even thought about it.
yeah.
And he's like, I bet you're saying, oh, stupid Bilbo, you didn't even think of this.
Right, because they're helping each other, because somebody has to put the lid on the barrels.
Yeah.
So because they have to look like they were, sealed, and Bilbo obviously puts all the lids on, and then he can't get in a barrel himself. So now
Right.
and then the elves are coming in to release the barrels, so Bilbo goes invisible again, and the barrels all get released without him.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
It is pretty funny. So yeah, then they float down the river.
Because Bilbo ends up falling into the river, right?
Yeah.
And he ends up grabbing onto a barrel as the barrels are floating. So he does get out of there, and then they end up floating down the river and getting picked up at the bottom.
Yeah. But like Bilbo, he has like a little bit of a like where he's on his own, where he like they don't talk about it very much, but it's like, but Bilbo came back with like a pie and something that did not belong to him. I just love that.
I know.
I thought that was so cool.
Dude, those little touches are awesome.
Yeah. I think so too.
Again, I hate to keep doing this, but again, just to show like the lack of drama in the book versus the movie, there is no elf that loves a dwarf in the place. None. No. There was no point to that story in the movie. That was just an added thing that really didn't need to be there. And it was, the way the book did it was perfectly fine. It didn't need to be there. But I digress.
So then they get out of the barrels, and then they're like actually kind of close to the mountain by this point, right?
Yeah, because they end up in Lake Town, which Lake Town,
right
at the base of the Lonely Mountain, there's a lake. And there was two towns. There was Dale, which was at the very base of the mountain, and then there was Lake Town at the other end of the lake, is how I understand it. And so basically, when they get to Lake Town, they tell the people of Lake Town what they're doing, because the people of Lake Town like capture them, and they're like, the people of Lake Town know who Thorin is because they live right there at the mountain. And so Thorin's like, look, we're going back to the mountain to reclaim all the treasure, and we basically need help. And
and they help him out.
Yeah, they end up helping him by giving him like some tools and some food, and they give him new ponies and that stuff to make it back to the mountain.
Right, because they can't ride horses because they're too small.
They're too small, yeah. It's always ponies that they have.
Well, and he's so consistent about saying ponies. Always.
Yeah. He never says horses, yeah, because Yeah, that'd be silly for a dwarf to be on a horse.
Right, yeah. It's just obviously doesn't make any sense.
So I can't remember though. Do they they end up telling them, right? Okay, we'll give you some of the treasure. They tell the
Yeah,
people, right?
they do. They do. They the king. They tell him they'll give him part of the treasure.
Yeah. Okay. So then they end up they leave. They go to the mountain because they had this map that basically said there was a back entrance to the mountain that they could get in only on like a specific day at a specific
Right.
time.
Because
Which I
it's
did
like
not
written in moon runes, right?
which I did not really like any of that part of the story. For the sole purpose, it was way too like convenient that after all that time they happened to show up right on the perfect time at the right day, and I didn't like any of that part of it. But that very
Right,
very small detail.
So they get in, and then they're like, Bilbo, you have to go check it out and see if Smaug is still in there.
Right.
So
Bilbo goes in with his
Yeah, go ahead.
ring, so he's invisible. And what ends up happening, I love this, is he goes in and he sees Smaug is in there. And Smaug is basically sleeping on this giant piles of gold. It's just the whole floor is nothing but gold coins and jewels and cups and all this stuff. And Smaug's in there sleeping. And so Bilbo's like, oh my God, he's still in here. But Bilbo's like, well, they'll think I just didn't come down here. So he grabs a chalice basically, and he's like, I'll take this back to him to show them that I came all the way down here. And he goes, he shows them the cup. This is what wakes Smaug up because he knows the treasure so well that he knew that one cup was missing from all the treasure.
Well, and I think it's important too that they're like away from their supplies because they're like up. They had to go like up to get to this door, so they're not by all their stuff.
They had to get hoisted up to the door. Yeah, that's right.
So Smaug wakes up, and so so Bilbo goes back the next day, and when he goes back there, Smaug is awake, and he knows that Bilbo's there, but he can't see him because he's invisible.
Right, he can only smell him. So, and not to take away from this, but I love the line in the book, and I can't remember it word for word, but he basically says, Smaug is like a rich person who has everything they could ever want, but they have all these other things that they don't care about and they never use. But if one of those things were ever stolen, that's the kind of wrath that a dragon has. Right. And I thought that was such an incredible detail that he put in there for some reason. It just I don't know why. I thought that line was awesome.
So Bilbo goes
it's
back.
Exactly true.
Yeah, it is true. And I do like later when they talk about Smaug and he's like the things that he's doing are vindictive.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And just because he's pissed that they basically they want to steal his treasure, even though a dragon doesn't do anything with treasure other than keep it.
It just attracts them.
Yeah. So, Bilbo ends up going back. Smaug is awake now because that woke him up. It woke Smaug up that he took one cup from him. And Smaug can smell him, and Smaug can talk to him.
And I like the exchange they have because Bilbo's really coy about who he's with and stuff. But Smaug kind of knows. I love that he's like I ate however many ponies last night. That's how many there has to be. Only people who would be on ponies would be dwarves.
Yep.
You don't smell like a dwarf.
Yep. I love how Bilbo doesn't want to tell him his name, so he's like, I'm the rider of barrels and the defeater of spiders, and he gives him all these titles instead of a name. And the dragon appreciates
can tell
it.
if they're lying. Kind of.
Right.
That's how I interpreted it.
But I like too that the dragon appreciates his titles that he gives.
Yeah, he does.
Thought that was so
Smaug
awesome.
actually has quite a bit of character.
He really does. And I will say, I think of all the movies, the second one is my favorite, and because of Smaug, and they got Smaug very right. I didn't like a lot of the things because the interactions between there is no interaction between the dwarves and Smaug. None. But in the movie they had like all that exchange and stuff, and it was very unnecessary because essentially what happens is Smaug goes outside and he's like, that's fine, I'll find them, I'll kill them. So then the dwarves come in, and then Smaug comes back once, and he still can't get a hold of them through this little cave they're in. So then he's like, fine, it must be men of Lake Town that are helping you do this. I'll just go burn Lake Town to the ground.
Right.
So Smaug leaves and he goes to Lake Town and proceeds to try to burn it to the ground, basically. This is one of the
a pretty good job.
This is one of the few parts too where the camera leaves Bilbo and is going to follow someone else, but it
doesn't
clearly
tells away.
you that. No, it doesn't, because what ends up happening is it clearly tells you, like, you get a little bit of exchange of the dwarves and Bilbo. Once they get in there, they start finding like new armor and weapons and all these things, and then it's like, okay, now we're going to go back and we're going to tell you what Smaug did once he left. And I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, I think he says he's like if you wanted to know what happened to Smaug, you would have to go back 2 days before in Lake Town.
Right. Yep. I thought that was cool how he.
Yeah, I like that too.
I very much appreciated that he's jumping around in time, like by just a few days, but he's letting you know, so that way you're not like, well, wait a minute, how did this happen in that amount of time? He doesn't make you wonder. He tells you, no, this was like 2 days beforehand. Like,
and I think it's important that we mention that, like, Bilbo, like, one of the things, he found this like huge gemstone and he took it because he was afraid the dwarves weren't actually going to give him his share of stuff.
Right. He started wondering if he was going to get his 1/14th cut of.
Yeah. So
and they told him, they said once we get in, you can have whatever you want as your 1/14th cut.
Yeah.
So he took this. He finds out later it's called the Arkham Stone, and it was the heart of the mountain that the dwarves dug out.
And it's like one of the main reasons why Thorin even wants to be here.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute because I think that it's very telling of kind of like things we are going through nowadays, basically. Yeah. So then we get a clip of Smaug destroying Lake Town, and we get a clip of Bard, this human man from Lake Town. They're firing arrows up at Smaug. Can't hurt Smaug. But when Bilbo saw Smaug, he realized that Smaug, when he was sleeping on his side, was missing like some of his scales.
He tricked him too into like rolling over so he could look at his belly again.
Right. And he saw that he was missing scales in one spot on his underside.
And also another bird saw this.
That's correct. The thrush, right? Thrush. Yeah, the thrush. That's right. So the thrush, this little bird, flies to Lake Town, and when Smaug is burning the city to the ground, they're firing arrows at Smaug. Can't hurt him though. He's just burning them all down. He's raping their churches and burning their women. So, but this thrush lands on Bard's shoulder as he's holding back his very last arrow. And the thrush, we find out that men of Dale are able to understand the birds. This is also something that Tolkien wasn't going to tell you until this one point, which is fine.
Well, I mean, he even mentions, though, like, there's this bird, like, following them around. And, like, Bilbo says, he's like, I think it's watching us.
That was way more elegantly done in the book than in the movie.
Oh, I've never seen that movie at the part in the movie at all. I've never seen the third movie.
Okay. I'll just tell you, it's way more elegant in this because yes, you see this bird, this thrush, numerous times, and they keep mentioning it, like, hey, there's that same bird. Hey, there's that same bird. That's because that bird is essentially spying on the dwarves and Bilbo to see what's going to happen. And this bird, these thrushes, can talk to the men of Dale. And without getting into too much backstory, Bard is technically the ruler of Dale, but Dale was burned to the ground. So,
right.
Anyways, this bird tells him, "Hey, you need to aim for like right under his whatever it was, like his left,
I think it's left.
you know,
breast.
close to the center left breast, probably where his heart would be." And so Bard fires this one arrow, boom, sticks it, kills Smaug. He's dead. He was only in the story for like an hour. It wasn't very long.
Well, and the way he dies isn't even that dramatic. He just dies.
Oh, no.
And then he just cuts away. So again,
He
Smaug
dies.
was dead.
Yep. He just falls in the water. And then it like jumps way ahead in the future, and it's like, yeah, you know, his bones are still there sticking up out of the water, but nobody will go near them. And then boom, jumps right back in, cuts back into the story right where we left off. I thought that was impressive.
And so it doesn't take the townspeople very long to be like, oh, the dragon's dead, so all that treasure's probably up there unguarded. So let's go check it out.
Because they assume one of two things happen. Either the dwarves are there because they rousted Smaug, or they're dead. So they're like, well, if they're dead, we'll just go take all the treasure for ourselves now.
And so they like basically go up to the mines, and the dwarves have basically like reclaimed it as their kingdom, and they like have all the gates shut and shit.
And the one gate that Smaug busted out of, and where he busted in when he first took it over, they like barricaded it up. So you can't even, there's no gate anymore. You can't even like walk in or out of it. You have to use a rope to climb down their wall.
Right.
And then, so when the men are going up there though too, right? They run into the elves because
we don't hear about that till a little bit later, I think.
No, but after the dwarves escaped from the elves, that the elf king is like, oh, well, obviously we know where they're going because we know who they are. So the elves also put together an army and marched there too because now they want their cut of the treasure.
Yeah, they want their monies.
Yeah. So then we also get this awesome little exchange because that same thrush shows up and tries to talk to the dwarves. Can't talk to the dwarves because none of them know how to talk to him. So he flies off, and then he comes back with an old ass raven.
Yeah.
And the raven can talk to the dwarves, and the raven kind of tells them what's happening.
Yeah, he tells them like people are coming.
Yeah, the raven basically says like, hey, you know, all the men from Lake Town. And does he tell them the elves too, right? He says the elves are coming.
Well, because the elves are actually like amassing an army, aren't they?
Yeah. And so Thorin is like, fine, I need to get a hold of my whatever he is, cousin, uncle, cousin,
uncle.
I can't remember either now.
It's hard to remember. But so basically, like he's trying to contact like the bulk of the dwarves in a different place so that they can defend this place.
Yeah, because they're like, hey man, basically tells the raven, he's like, hey, go tell my my brother Dine that we took over this and now someone's trying to take it, so he needs to come fight with us.
And so this is like where the Battle of the Five Armies comes from, right?
Yeah, it is, because you basically have, so what ends up happening in short order is that the elves and the humans are like, hey man, all we want is our cut. And Thorin's like, no, you guys get nothing. Because Thorin is kind of an asshole, we find out towards the end. And then Dine, the other dwarf army shows up, and they're basically like, hey, we're gonna fight right here. And then Gandalf is there too, because Gandalf shows back up. And also at one point, Bilbo sneaks out of there with his ring and gives the humans, the men, the Arkham Stone. And he's like, because Bilbo is basically like, I don't want anybody to get hurt. That's basically what Bilbo's trying to do.
Right, he's just trying to de-escalate it all.
Yeah, and so what he does is he gives the Arkham Stone away to the men, to Bard, which Bard is a very reasonable person, we find.
Yeah, he's actually really cool.
Yeah, he is a really good character.
Well, and the humans
little screen
don't.
Time.
Yeah, the humans don't want to take all the treasure. They just want enough to rebuild their city. That's all they want.
Yeah, they just want their cut that they were told they would have, and then they just want enough to repair Lake Town, and also, if they could, rebuild Dale. Which
I think that was the main terms, was that they want to rebuild Dale because they lost Dale because the dwarves were so greedy.
Right, because the only reason Smaug showed up and destroyed everything was because of the dwarves in the first place.
Right.
So basically now we have what? You got the elves, the dwarves in the cave, the humans, and the dwarves out of the cave. That's 4 armies.
Right.
So
that's 4. No, I would only consider that 3.
Okay.
So then the goblins show up because they basically have been tracking the dwarves this whole time, and they know where they're going too. They think.
And because when the dwarves were running out of their cave, they killed that goblin leader under
their king or whatever.
Yeah, and so this other goblin is like, man, no, can't do that. Like, I'll kill all of you now.
So this battle ensues between them all, right?
Well, because Gandalf was like, look, you guys can't fight each other. He's telling the dwarves and the humans and the elves, he's like, you guys don't want to fight. And then the goblins show up and Gandalf's like, oh man, I thought I think it was going to be that quick. So basically they have to make a plan like on the spot because Gandalf now, he's like, look, elves, humans, and dwarves. Basically nobody likes goblins. Nobody.
Yeah.
So
and I get the feeling the goblins were super strong. They had a huge army, right?
It sounds like they had a huge army, is what it was. Yeah. Basically, it was like all the goblins that were left were coming after them.
And so they start fighting, and then while they're fighting, the eagles show up to help out all the humans and stuff. That's the 5th army, I would say.
Well, Bjorn shows up too.
You're right. Bjorn does show up.
Bjorn basically seals the deal because he shows up as a bear and he just starts killing everything he can get a hold of. And it's freaking
Bjorn's
awesome.
Cool.
And I think you're right, though. The 5th army probably is the Eagles. That's probably where the 5th army would come in.
And we don't even really get a lot of battle details because Bilbo gets like knocked unconscious while he's invisible.
Yeah, within like the first few minutes of the fight.
Yeah.
Which, you know what, though? To be honest, was a perfectly okay thing with me.
Yeah, I was fine with it too.
I mean, because really, the book would have probably been like 6 hours longer if he had described every single thing happening in this humongous battle.
And I mean, like, one of my favorite scenes from the movie is like the Battle of Helm's Deep. Like, I love that. Right. But like, that's like Bilbo's not really like a fighter.
Right. Yeah. So the first thing he does is go invisible because he doesn't want to fight.
Well, he wants to stay out of the way.
Yeah. And then he gets knocked out, which was awesome.
Yeah. And then he wakes up like outside and he's like, oh man, like where am I? And then he realizes nobody knew he was out there because he was fucking invisible.
He's still invisible. Yeah, he's laying on the ground invisible. And then, right, he like wakes up, takes his ring off, and some dude is there, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, you there? I was looking for you." And he's like, "We haven't been able to find you for 2 days or whatever it is."
Yeah.
He's like, "You were gonna be declared among the dead." He's like, "This was actually the last time we were gonna come look for you."
Right. And then Bilbo has like a really touching moment with Thorin where he like apologizes for all of his hubris.
Yeah,
and, like,
because
getting them into so much trouble.
And he admits to Thorin that he gave the humans the Arkham because Thorin was pissed because that was like one of the only things Thorin wanted. And that was the thing I was going to touch on is that Thorin literally says, that thing is priceless to me. It's all I want. But what's so silly is like, dude, it's just a rock. Like, it's just a rock.
Right, but it was like a symbol of his grandfather's like kingship.
Right. But it was also funny because he wanted that rock, and then he also wanted all the gold. He wasn't going to give anybody any of the treasure. Yeah. But it's like, what are you going to do then? Like, he was also basically saying, like, we're not going to spend any of it. We just want to keep it. It's like, dude, what's the point? It's kind of like rich people today. It's like, what's the point of having $10 billion? Like, what? Why was the point, like, of having that much money? Like, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting thing that Tolkien doesn't really go into detail about it. It was just something that stood out to me.
Well, and so the humans basically use the Arkham Stone to leverage. They just want to get their fair share out of him. That's all they're trying to do.
But really, all it does is piss Thorin off.
Well, until after the battle,
yeah. And then after the battle,
he changes his mind, and he like actually realizes that he's being a total butthole.
He has a very touching moment with Thorin Bilbo does, and then Thorin dies.
Yeah, because Thorin was weakened from the battle.
Yeah, which is definitely. I don't think he dies in the movie, does he? Oh yeah, I
I don't
think he
know. I haven't seen it.
does. I think. Yeah, you haven't seen it. I can't remember, but I want to say he does not, but I can't remember now. Probably does. Somebody send us an email and let me know.
Yeah, and then yell at us also.
Yeah, we don't care. Just first piece of mail is all we want.
Listen here, dumbass.
So then, after all is said and done, basically the rest of the dwarves are like, look, yeah, absolutely, you guys all take your fair shares. Everybody take their fair share. And Bilbo's like, man, I can't even carry all this home. He's like, how about you give me one small chest of silver and one small chest of gold, and we'll call it even.
Yeah, so then Bilbo and Gandalf travel back home together.
And it's kind of nice because while Tolkien describes it as being a long journey, he cuts through it pretty quick. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't because he could have written a whole nother book probably just on Gandalf and Bilbo going back home.
I love.
We also find out.
Oh, go ahead.
We find out where Gandalf was, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah,
He's
I was
having a
taking
meeting
care of
with
the
wizards.
necromancer."
Yeah.
He's like, "I had to take care of the necromancer in whatever the lands to the west. It's no big deal. It's good. It's all good." Like,
Yeah. And you're like, okay.
yeah. Nobody's like, what? Yeah. It's just okay. It's all good.
And I love that when Bilbo gets home, he gets home like in the middle of while they're auctioning off shit from his house because they thought he was
Yeah.
dead.
I love that too. Yeah.
And he
Yep.
just buys his own stuff back.
Yeah, he buys everything back with the money that he brought back, and he still is rich after he does
Yeah.
that.
And then it pretty much just ends.
Yeah, it really does. It kind of ends on a very abrupt note because basically then after Bilbo gets back, he's like, "Well, I'm just going to write a book about everything that I just did. I'm going to write my memoirs." And he's going to call it There and Back Again.
Which actually the original title of The Hobbit was called The Hobbit There and Back Again. I didn't know that.
Yep.
So yeah, that's The Hobbit.
That's pretty much it. I mean, I feel like we probably could have talked about this for about 5 hours, but I know one, I know Bo's tired because I kind of screwed him over on this podcast tonight, and two, we mostly just think you should go listen to it for yourself because you're not gonna do it justice.
And I think we kind of hit on the points like that I like to talk about, but I mean like definitely the subtlety, the lore in general, like this whole world is just so interesting. It feels so lived in. Like even like what they're trying to do, nobody cares. Like they're doing their own stuff.
Yeah, because the world is going on around them. That's exactly right. Like, yeah, we're only talking about 15 characters in this massive, massive world, though.
Right. And I mean, what's the one called? I need to read it now. The one about all the lore.
The Silmarillion.
The Silmarillion.
Yeah, and I mean, Tolkien. The thing is Tolkien has a lot of stories that did not. A lot of this stuff didn't even get published until after he died. Yeah. So basically, the thing is there's so much lore to this world that he created. But like I said, most people only know the small snapshot, which is the Lord of the Rings. And that story, or those 3 stories, I guess I should say, is such a tiny snippet of this massive world he created.
Yeah, and it really is. And I think The Hobbit's a really good jumping off point for all of that.
Right, and that's kind of what I meant too, is like even The Hobbit compared to The Lord of the Rings, I would say this is a much better starting point for people because this one is really written relatively simple.
And for it being as old as it is, like it is so easy to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's what I was going to say is that's different once you even get into the Fellowship of the Ring is it starts getting a little bit harder language-wise basically to follow. It's not as good of a jumping off point because
Well, and those follow multiple things kind of happening at the same time instead of this being
Yes.
like one cohesive story.
Right, and I think that is the biggest difference is like the Hobbit, like I said, our camera is basically trained on Bilbo for almost the entire story. And when it's going to leave Bilbo, they tell you very clearly.
Yeah, and they
But
make it really obvious like what events they're telling you about.
right, that's where it differs from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Fellowship of the Ring, not so much, but once you start getting into the Two Towers and everybody starts splitting up, that's where you're going to get a lot more jumping around, and it starts getting a little harder to follow.
Right.
Yeah, we definitely need to pick up the Silmarillion though, because I've been wanting to dive into that one for a long time.
Yeah, it sounds good. I would
And
like
there's
to know the
only
lore behind it all.
there's only a couple other books too that Tolkien has like on Audible. I think there's more short stories that he's written that are probably only in book form. But like there's also The Children of Hurin, which is on Audible, and then Tales from the Perilous Realm. All are in his universe. These are all in Tolkien's universe. Tolkien very much so came up with this world, and his world was big enough to write probably an unlimited amount of books in. Whereas a lot of writers, they write one book about this one scenario and world they came up with, and then the next one they're like, well, let's move on to a different one. Like Tolkien's world was so fleshed out that it's almost insane.
It is almost insane. So yeah, I think I'm good. What about you, Ryan? You got anything else you want to say?
No, I'm definitely good. I know I kept you way too long on this one. I know
No,
you're
it's okay.
tired to go to bed, so
I figured at least
But
this one would at least be an hour.
I was so excited to talk about this one though, man. And I
mean,
said, I could probably talk for so long.
Yeah, and I like this one. I don't think I like it quite as much as you, but I do like it a lot.
I like it, and I'm excited because this is the first time I've gone through this book. And I had friends even in like middle school that had read this book, but I wasn't that interested in it back then. And I mean, just now, I'm so glad I found it. Basically, it's such a good book.
Yeah,
Such a simplistic. It's incredible how, like we were saying, the world is so complex, but this book is so simplistic in the story that it was setting out to tell.
Yeah.
But so yeah, definitely highly recommended from me. If that wasn't obvious enough already.
Yeah, check it out. I think so. Check it out. Especially if you watch the movies and you were interested in them at all, then you'll like this.
Sure. Yeah, and again, the movies are good. I'm not putting the movies down. I absolutely love the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies. The Hobbit trilogy of movies, I like them because they were entertaining, like I said. But for sure, do yourself a favor if you like the movies and just go through the book, because the book is going to give you a lot more stuff as far as depth goes to this world than the movies did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so yeah,
Oh, what are we doing next time, Ryan?
What are we doing next time? We are doing. I don't have my phone with me. What is it? Mistwick School for Musical Magic or something?
Mistwick School of which is
Of
no,
music.
actually, yeah, we're doing Mistwick School, and then after that, in October, the month of spooky, we are doing The Shining.
That's right, and I need to get on that. I'm sure, because that one is going to be tough for me. So
Why? Is it long?
I think it's probably not going to be easy to follow. That's why.
Oh,
It's a Stephen King book, man.
Shit.
Yeah. So if we've ever made jackasses out of ourselves, it'll probably be on that one. So
Yeah. Well, good. Then maybe we'll actually inspire some hate mail.
hey, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Some
Again,
legitimately angry mail.
We just want to reiterate that if anybody wants to get a hold of us, please do. We're still patiently waiting. So
Yeah. Our email is kotpl.pod@gmail.com. Hit us with the hate mail.
please. hit us with just a piece of mail so I know
Yeah,
that
it could
actually
literally,
works.
it could just be a smiley face, and I would be that would make my whole week. I don't think you
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, because I don't even know if the email works. We've gotten a couple things from the like admins at Twitter, and that's it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
So
all right.
please,
Let's
we're
wrap
wrapping
this
this
one
one up. The Hobbit,
Yeah,
good.
so
Go listen
yes,
to it.
excellent. Yeah, definitely. Catch you guys in
Yeah,
the
we'll
next
catch you
one.
next time.